Tyre Nichols loved sunsets. He was a father. He'd been out to photograph the twilight sky in his home city of Memphis when 5 black police officers pulled him over. The letter said it was for reckless driving. There's no evidence to substantiate that. It's still unclear why they stopped him. What is clear is that Tyre Nichols was subjected to a savage and horrific beating, taking sustained blows from the officers as he cried out for his mother, and he died 3 days later.
First of all, I want to say how disgusted and revolted I am of that specific murder. A young father killed by multiple cops in service. This is something that we should never tolerate as a society. This is despicable in all ways. We should stand against this type of violence. We should stand against this type of abhorrent action by the police officers that were in action. That should never in any situation be tolerated. This type of action, especially this type of video, are so violent that I can't even comprehend how people can get to this type of violence. As a society, any type of murder like this, free violence, should not be tolerated.
Black people are at risk from police no matter what color. Black, white, brown, you talk to African Americans, they'll tell you, it doesn't matter. There's this pervasive view from law enforcement that if you're black, you're dangerous.
Despite the fact that this crime is abhorrent, this should not be celebrated and this should not be tolerated either. Why are we blaming it on racism? Why every time something bad happens to a black person, even when no white person or any other color is involved, we are calling racism? This is something that is really isolated to the black community. And that's not normal. People should be accountable for their actions. And it should not be blamed on the color of their skins. Today, in America, as a black person, you have 88% of chances to be killed by another black person. So in terms of odds of being killed, it's not about racism, it's about odds. Today, black people kill black people. And no one talks about it. This doesn't sell any news. This doesn't sell any paper. It doesn't fit the narrative. And for me, I do acknowledge on one side that the crime should not be tolerated. But at the same time, we should say that this is nothing to do with racism. If we keep perpetuating the same rhetoric, we are ending up removing all responsibility from the perpetrators. Because everything is institutionalized racism. When you study this specific case, what you realize is that Memphis, the majority of people are black people. At the same time, the majority of the police officers are black. At the same time, the chief police officer is a black woman. What is institutionalized racism in such environment where the majority of the people are black, serving a predominantly black community? We have to think logically instead of every single time call for racism. But why are we taking the blame away from the police officers? They are the ones to be blamed for it. And they should be considered not based on the color of their skins, but based on the crime they have committed. Continue this story.
Well, Black Lives Matter issued a statement saying that all police represent the interests of capitalism and impel state-sanctioned violence. Anyone who works within a system that perpetuates state-sanctioned violence is complicit in upholding white supremacy.
This is pure garbage. Saying that all police officers are bad, that the police needs to be defunded. That's not acceptable. This position that we are taking, especially as part of this movement, the BLM movement, that's not acceptable. We shouldn't say that we should defund the police, because defunding the police is leading to this type of exact actions. When you are recommending a specific prescription, the prescription is leading to this type of consequences. You have to think for yourself. If you're defunding the police, the budget are getting lowered. Because the budget are decreasing, then people are leaving the forces. on top of the pressure that is already put on police officers. As a consequence, you have to hire people that do not have the qualification to be police officers. Out of these 5 police officers that killed these innocent men, 2 of them were trained during the time where you didn't need this type of qualification in order to be a police officer. So defunding the police is leading to have police officers that are not fit for the job. If we want to tackle the issue, the solution is never to defund the police. And who is going to help you? If you have an emergency, someone breaks into your house, especially people that live in a bad neighborhood, dangerous neighborhood. If there's a situation, they can't even call the police. Who are they going to call? Because I have to emphasize that in this type of communities, the vast majority of people are good people. There's maybe 5% of people that are really toxic. These people that are creating the vast majority of the crime. But the majority of the people living in this dangerous neighborhood are good people. Good fathers, good mothers that just want to bring some bread on the table for their kids. So these people that are innocent, we should be able to help them if something happens. Let's hear from a BLM activist.
What's it got to do with racism and white supremacy?
So people
Why are
also-
white people responsible for this?
Okay, so people could also argue that this is due to internalized racism, which is a byproduct of societal or institutional racism, also referred to as white supremacy.
It's very difficult to keep a straight face when you watch this type of nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Institutionalized racism, white supremacy, whatever the situation, they will always use the same type of words. 5 police officers, black police officers killing a black man is white supremacy? That's ridiculous. Memphis forces are predominantly black. Yet this is what is advocating by BLM. And I really hate this rhetoric about black people not being able to have their own agency. Black people that cannot think for themselves. They are just a slave. So what she's saying here is that these 5 police officers, they just didn't have a choice. They had to kill this black guy because they are just part of the system that is white supremacy. So when you're saying this, you are actually removing any responsibility from the perpetrators. Let's continue.
A little bit better. Okay, so anti-blackness is baked into society here and in the US, and black people are not impervious to that. And so what people fail to
So
realise...
black
Hold on a
people are
second.
anti-black?
Yep, this exactly. So let me explain it. I know
This
it's
is
very
complete
confusing. So let me
nonsense.
explain it. Let me explain it, Piers. So what people fail to realise is that when black people have to contend with racism, they can end up internalising it. And that can result in low self-esteem, self-loathing, and rejection of one's community. And when you combine those feelings, which, as we know, are also referred to as unconscious bias, when you have those feelings and they are compounded by hierarchy and power, it can lead to an individual abusing said power and projecting their self-hate onto another.
This anti-blackness is just nonsense. For the very simple reason that in the UK, for example, black people fare totally differently based on where they come from. African on one side will fare much better than Caribbean black people. If this anti-blackness was true, they should be treated the same. I would even argue that African black people should be treated even worse because they tend to be darker in skin. If we think that everything is due to anti-blackness, how come these African black people in UK perform much better? So for example, in exams in school, they perform 20% better than Caribbean black people. On average, African black people perform better than the average white person. And on top of that, mixed kids from black people that are African also perform better than mixed kids from black Caribbean people. It has to do with something that is not skin color. And my belief is that this has to do with culture, what we value as a society. Let me take an example. If for you to increase in status, you have to have a big car and you have to sell drugs. That's going to put you on top of the socio-economic status in your surrounding. That's exactly what you're going to do. If going to university is valued, and that will put you above people that are selling drugs and have a car, then people are going to do it, because men are driven by status. And men are driven by status. They will show their status in order to obtain women. That's how it works. As a society, if you have black people that will fare better than other black people, you have to ask yourself, what is the difference? And the difference is that what African black people value is different than what Caribbean black people value. Amongst African black people, if you do not have a degree, you don't finish university, that is not acceptable in the community. So people obviously have to work for it. And they eventually decide to go to university and perform and get their degree. This is pushed by the culture. When this is not the case for black Caribbean people. Secondly, we have seen an increase in gun murder, so police officers being killed by gun by people since the BLM riots. So since BLM, we have seen an increase of 25% of murder of cops. Do you not believe that this increase is going to put the cops on hinge?
And this is why, in my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalized racism, Piers.
What she stated as a statistic is a lie. This is a blatant lie. There are not more black people killed by police officers than white people in the US. That's a lie. And people like this are using lies in order to portray a different truth, a different reality. She's lying in order to support her narrative of victimhood. As you can see here, there are much more white people being killed than black people in the US. That's a fact. This is coming from the Statista.com website. This has been extracted from the police data. When people are citing statistics, it's very important to cross-check them.
In my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalized racism, Piers.
Right. I think that's complete nonsense.
You would, because you're a white man and you don't understand.
Exactly. I'm white, therefore my skin colour means I have...
Because you don't have the lived
My
experience.
skin colour...
This is total nonsense. I'm black, and this is total nonsense. When someone states some nonsense, you have to point it out. And this is exactly what Piers Morgan is saying, and this is what Zuby will be saying later in the video. When you see life through a specific lens, this can have dramatic consequences for you. There is something called the prevalence-induced concept. If you expect a specific outcome, this is exactly what your brain is going to interpret. So if you look around and you expect to be treated differently, that people around you are racist, this is what you're going to see. If you expect people around you to be misogynistic, this is exactly what you're going to get in your brain. It doesn't mean that this is going to be the reality. So they've done this experiment. They've put and they sat people in front of the screen. In the screen, you will have a lot of purple dots and a lot of blue dots. They will come at the specific ratio. After a certain period of time of exposing the person to the specific screen with the same number of dots that are blue and purple, what they've done is that they've reduced the purple dots. And strangely enough, the person didn't realize this. And they started counting blue dot as purple. They did the same exact experiment with people's faces. Some faces were threatening faces and others were not. And they started to decrease the number of threatening faces. Guess what happened? People started to interpret non-threatening faces as threatening faces. They took it one step further. They gave to the participants different type of requests. and they gave about 20% of unethical requests. They started to decrease the number of unethical requests. And what happened is that the participants, started to classify ethical requests into unethical requests. That shows you the power that the brain has on reality and the perception of reality. If you think that racism is everywhere, then this is what your brain is going to interpret. Let's continue for Zuby.
Which is that when it comes to the police in the USA and also in other countries, there's clearly an issue of character, qualifications,
and prejudice.
Training. I don't know
prejudice.
Exactly. Yeah, and
prejudice is the foundation for all
yes,
forms of discrimination,
and
including sexism, misogyny, racism, and the list goes on. So if you have not dealt with your prejudice within an institution, it will manifest in your racism. That's a fact.
What's wrong with this woman? Why is she always using a bunch of words that have nothing to do with what they were discussing? She's talking about racism when it is 5 black cops against 1 black man. And then she's starting talking about misogyny, where it's men against men. She's insane. Why are you always reciting some nonsense? It doesn't have anything to do with racism or misogyny. Let's watch the last extract.
Beyond that,
That is clear, but we also need to take into account that black people internalise racism and they can perpetuate that racism within institutions. That is a fact.
yeah, I'll tell you what is a fact. This was 5 black police officers killing a black man, not because of racism or white supremacy, or because anything a white person has
Don't get it
done,
wrong.
but because they actually didn't know how to do their jobs. It got completely out of control. They behaved like a mob, a frenzied mob,
Just like
and they
white people do
completely
when they beat up black people, right?
lost control.
Because they're thugs as well. When white police beat up black
know
people,
what?
they're also thugs as well. Because black people aren't just thugs when they beat up black people.
Yeah, I didn't
and
say-
white people can also be perceived as
Yeah,
thugs when they beat up black people. Let's just be clear on your
Imarn,
language.
you can
please.
keep
No,
saying
just
whatever
be
you want.
clear on your
This had
language.
nothing to do with racism or white supremacy.
I want you to watch again the video. He never said thugs. So she's starting to get triggered and to provide an emotional response. He didn't even use the word thug. That's insane. So she's been stuck in her mind with this specific word and she wanted to say it. She wanted to complain about it. I think it's important as a society that we talk about this type of cases, that we should never ever tolerate such cases. There are bad people in all type of situations. There are bad people of all races as well. So it's not that because some people are getting killed, black or white, that this is something to do with racism. Throughout history, you had genocide committed by all type of people. And one thing that is very clear is that the George Floyd murder might not have been directed by racism. You will have bad white cops and bad black cops. That's the reality. And these people that are bad police officers, should not be allowed to stay in the police force. At the end of the day, if you're a man and you adopt this victim narrative, that's not going to work. It's not going to give you the power to change your life. You have to believe that your destiny, you can change it. If you keep buying into this victim narrative and being entitled to get something from the government or from someone else, this is not going to give you the outcome that you want in your life. So if you want to understand what are the key tenets to become the best version of yourself and a high value man, I recommend you to watch this video.